I'm going to kill you. These are the words of a man who deliberately retrieves a gun, who patiently waits for his target and repeatedly fires. Not once, not twice, not 3 times. He fires until he can't fire anymore. I'm going to kill you. Members of the jury, these are not just words, not just an empty threat, but a promise. A promise that this defendant made 1 week before he tried to kill Arturo Bonilla. Members of the jury, we're going to call Mr. Bonilla to the stand here today. We want to be completely forthcoming. You might not like him, but he is the victim in today's case, and we didn't choose him. The defendant did. So what happened? What is it that has brought us here today? Members of the jury, we're not here to tell you that the defendant is a bad man, but he did a bad thing. Throughout today's trial, you're going to learn that the defendant is a hardworking 50-year-old father from the Palmas neighborhood. A tough neighborhood where crime and violence are commonplace. And you're also going to hear that for the greater part of this defendant's life, he has risen above that crime and violence. So what changed? What changed to cause this defendant to see red? To fire until he couldn't fire anymore at the man who was driving just a few feet away from him? You're going to learn it was his 14-year-old daughter. Throughout today's trial, you'll learn that recently in school, her grades had begun to slip. She'd been spending more time out, more time on the streets, more time with Arturo Bonilla. Mr. Bonilla is going to tell you today, he had been socializing with the defendant's daughter. And he's also going to tell you about how he would taunt the defendant. He would call him an old man. He would insinuate that the defendant's daughter was promiscuous. You'll learn that at the beginning of December 2021, when the defendant learns about this relationship, he's sad. But he's also angry. Angry because the life that he rose above for the greater part of those 50 years, his daughter was now falling into. His daughter was now spiraling down the path with Arturo Bonilla. You're going to learn that this animosity first turns physical on December 3rd of 2021. The defendant walks into a bar that night, and Mr. Bonilla begins making comments to him, comments about the defendant's daughter. And this is when the defendant loses it. He pushes Mr. Bonilla. Mr. Bonilla falls to the ground. He tries to get back up, but then the defendant hits him with a punch. You're going to learn that the defendant's friend had to pull him off of Mr. Bonilla that night. And that same friend, you're going to learn, is the friend who gives him a gun. The gun that he fired until he couldn't fire anymore 1 week later. Members of the jury, on December 3rd, the defendant's friend was there to stop him. But on December 10th, the evidence will show his friend wasn't there. You see, it's on December 10th that the defendant sees Mr. Bonilla again. And those same feelings of rage and frustration rush back. On December 10th, the defendant is driving. And he looks up into his rearview mirror and he sees Mr. Bonilla driving in the car directly behind him. The two men, they begin yelling at each other. They begin speeding through traffic. But this is when the defendant deliberately retrieves a gun. He holds it low so it can't be seen, and he patiently waits for his target to come into range. He watches in his rearview mirror as Mr. Bonilla pulls up into the perfect position. And when he's right beside him, just a few feet away, that's when he fires. Not once, not twice, not 3 times. He unloads an entire magazine at Mr. Bonilla. Mr. Bonilla loses control of his car, he veers off the road, and he crashes into a streetlight. The responding detective will testify today that when she saw Mr. Bonilla step out of his car, he was bleeding from a gash on his head. He was complaining of pain in his arm. Mr. Bonilla tries to walk, but he collapses. We're going to call that detective to the stand because unlike most cases, the detective was there. She watched these two cars speeding through traffic and she heard those gunshots firsthand. But members of the jury, you don't have to take my word for it. You don't have to take the detective's word for it, and you don't have to take Mr. Bonilla's word for it, because this shooting was caught on camera. So throughout today's trial, pay close attention to that moment when the defendant holds that gun low out of sight. Pay close attention to where those last shots are headed, through the defendant's own windshield towards a fleeing car. There's a name for what all of this is, and it's written in the San Juan Penal Code. It is attempted murder, it's battery, and it's reckless endangerment. And we as the prosecution bear the burden in proving to you that this defendant is guilty of those crimes beyond a reasonable doubt. And we will do that today. And the defense, they may try to paint this deliberate act of violence as self-defense. And we as the government bear the burden in disproving that. Because what you'll learn today is that the law allows people to protect themselves. But what the law does not allow is for someone to take the law into their own hands, to deliberately retrieve a gun, to patiently wait for their target to come into range, and to repeatedly fire. To fire until they can't fire anymore at a man who is just a few feet away. And that's why at the end of this trial, my co-counsel, Mr. Hunter Perez, will come before you, and he will ask you to find the only verdict that is justified by the facts, the law, and your own common sense. Find this defendant guilty on all counts.